Hey, everyone. Welcome to the Business Growth Pod. I'm your host, Allan Draper. Got a very exciting episode for you in store today, something a little different. And so we're going to get into the details of that. Before we get started, make sure that you subscribe and leave me a review. That's the best way that you could say thank you for the content that I put out. That is the best way to help get this podcast in front of more people, and even more specifically, get it in front of people that are actually looking for it. So without further ado, I want to introduce our guest today. His name is Marcus Rader, and he's the founder and CEO of Hostaway, which is the world's leading vacation rental management platform. And this applies to anybody that's using, they have Airbnbs or short-term rentals. And all of you know that I'm really big into real estate, and I have multiple Airbnbs. And so I'm very familiar with this industry, and we're excited to chat with you today, Marcus. Welcome to the show.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So what made you one day wake up, or whatever the epiphany was, and say, hey man, I'm going to start not just a software company, I'm going to start a vacation management platform?
Very, very good question. I think it was around 2011 when we lived in Amsterdam with my wife, and we saw this TV show called Suits. It's about a bunch of lawyers. Yep. Later on, I think some actor ended up marrying some royalty.
Exactly.
Across seas. And then we moved to Toronto, to Canada. I saw the building, the office building where they were working, because it's the show is shot in Canada. And I thought, that's cool. I got to get a job there. So I managed to find a connection. I'm from Finland. I managed to find the connection of a guy who's actually, he bought the most expensive condo in Canada at one point, and he's from Finland. So I got an interview with his company, and I failed it because I didn't know how to convert gallons into ounces, because I had never used the imperial system in my entire life. This was about 7 years ago when I moved to Canada. I think that was when I realized that now that was the last job I'll ever have and I'll ever apply to. Now it's my time to make it big. I've been in tech startups about 10, 15 years before that. I was doing mobile games in 2006. That's pretty early, considering the iPhone came out in 2010, 2011.
Yeah.
And been in online marketing. Well, maybe not before Google, but certainly before a lot of ad tech came out. That's everyday today. And I've always been fascinated about real estate, investing into real estate. And I thought, there's got to be a way for me to convert my place in Amsterdam into a short-term rental and have it managed. Turns out there wasn't an app for that. I tried to find it. I checked what Airbnb offers. Back then in 2015, I didn't know anything about this industry, which later turned out to be a massive, unique selling point. It's really the core of our business is the fact that I had no clue what the short-term rental space is like. But I thought there must be an app for that so I can rent out my property. And there wasn't. Airbnb didn't offer anything like that. And I noticed, wow, this is a lot of manual work. I need to set up a lot of stuff. And how am I going to deal with the time zones? If someone's checking in the middle of the night and they have a question, am I going to wake up in the middle of the night? And my research found out that no, obviously I need a property manager. I need a company that has boots on the ground and takes care of this stuff. Not a friend, because they're gonna treat it like a hobby. They don't know what they're doing. I need a professional company that does it for hundreds of other properties. And then I started talking to these companies, and I found out that this is a really big business because everyone was doing well, and there were a lot of these companies in the cities. And I started interviewing them, and it was surprisingly easy. I just picked up the phone and I said, hey, I'm Marcus. I see you have a fascinating business. Can I take you out for coffee and ask you about your life? And they all said yes. So I interviewed. I spent three months on this, and interviewed about 40 of these companies, and they all had the same problem. They were missing software to run their business. So that's when I found the problem, and then we started working on the solution.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Which is, I think that's the greatest way to come up with a business idea. I get asked a lot, like, "Hey, what? I know I want to be a business owner. I know I'm an entrepreneur at heart. What should I do?" And I recommend that somebody, you find a hole in the market, you find an issue that's something that's personal, right? I think it makes it better if it's something that like really hits home, and you solve that problem in a way that's economically feasible so that someone will pay you for that. And that's fantastic. Tell me a little bit about what some of the early struggles were of getting the platform off the ground.
There were a lot of struggles. I think first of all, we didn't know anything about the industry, so we actually had to get me and my co-founder. He's based in Finland, and I was based in Canada. So we were 7 time zones apart already. We were remote before remote was a thing. We didn't know anything about this, and we realized that's going to be a weakness. So the first thing we did was we started renting out places on Airbnb just to get to know what it's like, because I had just spent 6 months at that time talking to people who are doing it, but you got to do it yourself. You got to clean the toilets. You got to know what it's like, and that was one of the things that brought us a lot forward. What we found out, though, was that there were massive barriers of entry in the industry, and that's something that got us really excited, because we found a pattern there. When Airbnb started, there were massive barriers of entry as well, because first of all, the entire market for Airbnb didn't even exist. They created a new market. What you had these websites like Expedia where you could find a hotel if you were going to a place that had a hotel in the first place. But Airbnb, in order to enter that, they couldn't, because people were looking for hotels. And then they were not looking in the places where they wanted to go because they didn't assume that there was going to be a place there. So Airbnb had to create an entirely new market, which is probably the biggest barrier of entry. But even they hacked their way through that. They found a solution. So once they put up a website that say you can stay on an air mattress in someone's living room, then when they got some visitors, they had a supply issue. They needed more supply. So they first manually, and then they automated the process to just scrape the data from Craigslist. And that I think is what really drove us to understand that, any barriers of entry there are, you can always get around them. And one of the biggest barriers of entry that we had, and that any solution in the space had at the time, was that Airbnb didn't want to work with us. In fact, nobody wanted to work with us. We had big companies like Airbnb, Vrbo, Expedia, Booking.com. Our software needed to connect into their systems.
Exactly. Yeah.
To get the reservations, to get the calendar data, to get to upload the pictures.
Yeah.
And they were just telling us, no, sorry guys, the door's shut. And we just kept knocking on the door for more than 3 years. That's a long time of knocking. And the weird thing is, when you're knocking on the door, you never know if it's the right door or not. So you might be standing there out in the cold, out in the rain, just knocking, and you never know if anyone's listening. The thing is, just keep doing it consistently enough. Eventually, someone's going to open the door and at least tell you to stop knocking. And that's when you know you're onto something. But yeah, it took about 3 years to even get to talk to someone at Airbnb. And at the time, they didn't have any partners. Today, there's not a lot of companies in the world, but we are one of the preferred partners of Airbnb. We're elite partners of Vrbo. There's only 10 of those in the world. And we're a premier partner of Booking.com. And when you combine these three, there's about a handful, maybe 5 companies on the planet that have these partnership statuses.
Yeah,
but I'm pretty sure
incredible.
all of them have spent many years standing in the rain and cold to get there.
That's funny. I remember reading the Airbnb story And it reminds me a little bit of Facebook, because Facebook wasn't the first like social website, right? And if I'm not mistaken, Vrbo was before Airbnb, but it was different. What Airbnb did was they kind of revolutionized it to where they're like, hey, turn your house into a rental, the house that you live in, share a room, whatever. And Vrbo was like, basically, it's just a vacation. If you have a vacation rental, but in those early days, and it started because if I remember correctly, the founders they were living in San Francisco. There was a big conference coming. Hotels were booked. And the air portion comes from, like you said, air mattress. And back in those days, like I remember so the air mattress concept came from, well, all the other rooms are being used. We're going to throw an air mattress on the floor in the living room, whatever. And then as they progressed and they started getting bookings, a funny thing that they did was they required, even if you had a bed, this is so weird to me, but if you had a vacant bed, they still made you put an air mattress on top of it. And they had to sleep on the air mattress instead of the bed. But it's a fascinating story. I think it was very short-lived, but they did. Yeah. And they wanted to stay true. And the first name wasn't Airbnb, obviously. It evolved over time, but they wanted to stay true to. And a lot of people wonder, well, where does the air come from? What does that have to do with anything? And it was because they required that in order to list with them, they had to sleep on an air mattress early on. One thing that you mentioned, Marcus, that kind of stuck with me was when you said, and you said it so nonchalantly, but I want the listener to pick up on this. You said that there were a lot of barriers to entry, but that was a good thing. How do you obtain that perspective? What do you tell yourself in order to get to that spot mentally where you view barriers of entry as a good thing for your business?
There's a lot of factors. Another major issue that we had that was more within ourselves was that the perception of the entire industry wasn't really there. I remember one pitch, and I had to pitch to so many investors because we didn't have any money when we started, and you need lots of money to build software, especially if you want to build a good software. I went to this one investor. I gave all my energy, my soul, for 20 minutes with a pitch, and then he said, I used Airbnb once. It wasn't good. I don't believe in the model. Bye. and that's what we were struggling with. And this wasn't in the early days of Airbnb. This was in 2015, 2016. We not only was it hard to enter the industry, but the entire industry didn't even know if it really existed. A lot of investors didn't find a total addressable market at all. And that's really what excited us, because we knew that we had to pick we had to play with the probabilities. Probabilities, if there's an opportunity to get in somewhere and it's really easy to get in, then a lot of people are going to get in. If it's a market that everyone knows is going to be a gold mine, then everyone's going to get in. So you want to pick a market that people don't really know if it's there or not, or they don't see it as a gold mine. And at the same time, it's got to be a market that's, if someone sees it, it's going to be impossible for them to break the barrier. And that's what we enjoyed with it, because we thought, well, it's going to be hard either way. If we now want to start competing with a company like Disney or Coca-Cola, that's going to be incredibly hard, because thousands of companies have tried that and they all failed. But if we just start a new company that does something in an industry that barely exists, then we're going to have the same struggles. But if we succeed, we're going to have so much less competition. And that's exactly what happened.
Yeah, that's incredible. I think that's such a great lesson, because a lot of entrepreneurs, they're looking for the low-hanging fruit, or what appears to them to be the low-hanging fruit, right? Getting into an industry that already exists, that there's It's been tested time and time again. And I think ultimately, Marcus, it really boils down to risk versus reward. Obviously, you didn't have a crystal ball back then. You didn't know for sure what was going to happen. It sounds like you really believed in the concept when there were a lot of others who were naysayers about it. But you didn't have that crystal ball, but you believed in it enough to where you did something about it. And I think that speaks a lot to your risk tolerance, because we all go through this process of, wondering what happens if we fail. How'd you overcome that? Or tell me a little bit about your thoughts about that. Is that what you thought? Did you ever get to the point where you're like, this could all come crashing down? Then what?
Our cash flow spreadsheet for so many years, we were always going to bankruptcy, if not next month, in 3 months or maybe 6 months, but it was always there. At some point, my co-founder said, "Hey, we're going to run out of money in 3 months." I didn't even hear it anymore. It was just everyday noise for me, because I knew that, you get numb when you get so close to death for so long. You get numb to it. It just doesn't exist anymore. I think there were a couple of things that really helped keep our motivation up and keep us going. One of them was we didn't have this great idea. We didn't go and say, "Oh, this is what the software is going to do, and it's going to be fantastic." Instead, we were trying to build a software around businesses' needs. So we asked them what they want, and we didn't have this bold vision for what the product is going to be. Instead, we had a bold vision that we believed in a couple of trends: globalization. We believed in travel. We believed in real estate becoming a commodity. We believed in working from home. We believed in digital nomads. And these were trends that they were our North Stars. So even if, one investor had never heard about Airbnb, that's okay, because we still think that working from home or digital nomads, people moving to different countries, and real estate becoming so expensive that you're going to want to rent smaller portions of it. 20 years ago, you would buy a home and live there until you die. We believe that 20 years from now, you will, instead of buying a home for the rest of your life, you will maybe rent a home for 1 week at a time, or maybe a month. In fact, I'm doing it right now. I'm spending this August in Montreal, because I think Montreal is an incredibly cool city, and may sound like a digital nomad, but I got my wife and my kid with me as well. It's really exciting to finally live that life. So that was our North Star, the vision. The other thing that I only found out about 5 years later that really helped us was that we had a category. And now that I've been coaching and mentoring a lot of, especially SaaS and B2B SaaS companies, one of the major problems they have is that they don't have a category to fit into. Let's say you build some really cool tool that does marketing, improves marketing somehow. When you want to be in a category there, it's incredibly hard, because if you want to be a marketing platform, you're suddenly competing with HubSpot. And then if you don't do exactly what HubSpot is doing, then you got a problem. But of course, your tool is unique. We never had that problem, and we didn't realize it until later. We never had that problem because we started marketing the product before we had anything else available. So I borrowed $200 from my wife and put an ad on Facebook that said, "Do you need Airbnb management software? Click here." And people clicked, and they gave me their phone number. I called each one of them, and I confirmed that they wanted Airbnb management software. But what I realize now, later, that I listened to the struggles of young entrepreneurs, is that we had problem, solution, and the product were all three the same. Problem people had was that they needed software to manage their Airbnbs. The solution was to build a software that manages Airbnbs, and the product is a software that manages Airbnbs. Now, that's extremely rare, because most companies, they need, problem isn't that you want a Coke and the solution is a Coke. No, it's that you're thirsty, but you also want something sweet. Just as an example. And the more complex your product is, the harder it's going to be to define the problem and the solution and then build the products to get a product market fit. But we almost never had that problem because the demand for this was so high. Because the high barriers of entry, probably.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting point because a lot of entrepreneurs, and what I'm taking away from this is I feel like we're talking about niche a little bit. We're talking about, hey, what's this, hyper specific group that we're going to solve a problem for. And one of the problems, Marcus, that a lot of entrepreneurs face when they start is they want to be a solution for everybody. They want their niche to be everybody and everything. And they think that it's going to help specifically with marketing. They think, hey, if I sell something that everybody needs and I hold myself out, my company out to be a company or sell a product that can help everyone, then my marketing efforts will be easier because my demographic is larger. But they quickly realize that it's the opposite. A lot of it's just because of competition, right? If you're going after everybody in the world, then all the companies are your competition. But if you really niche down to a specific problem, then you're able to address that problem to a specific type of people. I'll give you an example. I own a digital marketing agency, and we focus on a very specific demographic. We help all companies, but we really market to and specialize in home services. So any type of business that they do home services, window washing, landscaping, pest control, that's really our strength. Is that kind of what you're getting at here, Marcus, where, you talked about how you need to have a category? Are we kind of on the same page with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And if the category is so wide, and in some cases it doesn't exist, many people start a company and the category isn't there. Let's say you have I was actually one of our partners on our marketplace. I was talking to them the other day. We got a marketplace, by the way, with over 100 integrated software partners, and a lot of them are startups. They produce security for check-ins for vacation rentals. Now, if you type that into Google, you're not going to find a category page. If you search for vacation rental software, on the other hand, you're going to find a lot of websites that have listed, here are the top 20 vacation rental softwares. Mm-hmm. But in their category, the security aspect or check-in process, there's no category pages for that. So how do you then get the funnel? And this is where you want a category that is wide enough to exist, but is so shallow or narrow that you can still stand out. Because if you want to build marketing software, you're going to have a very hard time because you'll be competing with everyone. But if you can find one that's so small that it still has its own category, for example, email marketing software, if you Google that, you'll find a lot of pages that lists, here are the top email marketing tools, for example, then that's where you want to be.
Yeah. And one thing that when I'm talking to an entrepreneur, I'll tell them, and they come to me and they're like, no, I have these huge ideas. No, that's perfect. There's nothing wrong with it. But let's start super, super niche. Even if you have these larger plans to expand and include a larger market segment, but let's start super niche. Let's learn about each other. Let's learn about our demographic. Let's get really good at what we're doing. Then let's expand and include other types of services or a larger demographic and kind of back out. It's kind of, going back to Facebook. That's exactly what they did, right? At first, you had to have a harvard.edu, right? Email address, and then other colleges, Ivy League, whatever, and they kind of backed out. And I think it's a common issue with entrepreneurs because the great thing about us is that our minds and our dreams are really big. right? We don't want to do anything to limit that. But I think the real limiting decision would be to make your demographic and your market too big. I wanted to shift gears here. We have about 5 minutes left, Marcus, and I wanted to talk to you about what are the common mistakes that startup entrepreneurs face, and what were some of the issues that you guys ran into and you had to overcome in order to become successful?
Very good question. One of the common mistakes that I see is that people are often they don't know what to focus on, and that's probably from lack of experience. Because if you're starting your first company, by definition, that's your first company, and it doesn't help if you worked in 10 other companies. It's not the same. It's never going to be the same, but it really helps if you have someone else who just tells you what to do. I can give a good example. I had a life-changing moment about 4 years in on my journey. I read a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. And I just started crying because that book just took all the pressure away from me and said, don't blame yourself. It's okay. It's normal. However, had I listened to my wife just about 3 months before I started the company and followed her advice, I would have read that book before I even started, which would have saved me from so much trouble. Another thing we did was we actually have 3 co-founders, but one of them, instead of giving us their everything, he gave us money because we needed money more. So he was an angel investor that's not really operational, but he had the experience. He had raised money before, he had a successful exit before, and he kept telling us, this is what you need to focus on. You think this is important, but it's not. That thing over there, that's important. And also having a co-founder, I can be transparent. When I started looking for a co-founder, I wanted to give exactly 50% of the shares. I know a lot of people would give 30% of the shares, or some would give 49 to keep the majority. I wanted to give exactly 50 because I wanted the accountability there be 50%. So as co-founders, that's a relationship. It's a bit like a marriage. You grow together, and having someone to constantly tell you, look, don't focus on this, that's incredibly important. But what I often see is that entrepreneurs, they fall astray because there's just a million things you need to do. Actually, you don't need to do them, but you can do them. And some of them, if you don't do them, your company will fail. However, you got to determine which ones do you need to do well, which ones do you need to do now, which one can wait, which one can you do badly or cheaply. And it helps to just have any outsider, anyone at all. But it's got to be someone that has a pure interest in the company going well. And that usually can't come from friends or family because they want you to do well. But what's good for you, it's not necessarily good for the company, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, 100%. Marcus, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's so important to have a mentor. And I talk about that a lot on the show. I talk about how the different ways that people can find a mentor. And I talk about the different types of mentors. It sounds like that's a great opportunity to have somebody that's very hands-on. They're literally invested in what you're trying to accomplish. So you're shoulder to shoulder with them, which is the ideal mentor. I also talk about how there's mentors in the forms of books and podcasts and information online, right? That you can get access to really high-level people without them even necessarily knowing that they're mentoring you, right? And then you take that information and you apply it to your business or your specific case. But that's fantastic, Marcus. Your story is amazing. Why don't you tell us where people can go to learn more about Hostaway, learn more about your story and the incredible platform that you guys have built?
Sure. So if you're interested in checking it out, or if you're building an app for the Airbnb space, then go to hostaway.com. There's a lot of videos online. We produce some of the most popular webinars in the vacation rental space. We produce them every month, so you can join those, sign up on our email list on hostaway.com. If you want to get in touch with me personally, just type in Marcus Hostaway LinkedIn into Google and send me a message there. I tend to read that a lot more than I read my email. And you can also email at marcus@hostaway.com, but it's you may not get an answer there.
Awesome. Well, this has been fantastic. Today we were speaking with Marcus Rader. He's the founder and CEO of Hostaway. It's been a pleasure having you join us today, Marcus. I wish you nothing but success in the future, my man.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to be here.
If you have enjoyed today's podcast, please leave us a rating. And for daily inspiration and business tips, follow Allan on Instagram. Until next time, remember, we build the future one entrepreneur at a time.